Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 117 of the podcast. Today we're talking to Will Munn about tabletop gaming and the system that he has created and all the new systems that he's potentially creating in terms of tabletop gaming, world building, and how that leads to his creativity. As a note, today is Monday, April 29th, 2024, as I record this, just in case you're listening to this in the future, gives you some reference of when we had this conversation because Will has some upcoming books that are coming, and he talks about his most recently published books. So you want to stick around for that conversation. Now, in terms of updates this week, I always like to start with Homestead updates, primarily because those are often fresh in my mind, because there's always a lot of crazy things going on. So this last weekend, this last week, really, we had the other two goats who were due to have their babies. One of them took a very long time to have them. We sensed the signs of her having the babies about 24 hours before she actually did. So definitely had a couple sleepless nights as a result of waiting for her to have those babies. She did finally. So we have all three of them had sets of twins. We ultimately ended up with three boys and three girls mixed among them, which is exciting. We do have one more goat that will be having babies, but it's like a month and a half out. So we've got some time before that. Fortunately, everything was well. They're all healthy, happy, thriving. They're adorable. Make sure to grab some pictures and add it to my email list if you'd like to follow that. You can see some of the pictures I send. They do look very similar. All the coloring ended up about the same. Last year we had a couple off the wall ones. We had a pure, almost white, pure white one that came from a all black coat mom, which was a little bit crazy, but nothing crazy like that this year. Just a lot of mixed colors, browns, blacks, whites. So it's gonna be a little tricky to keep them all apart from each other because they do look very similar. But we're all happy that they're healthy and there's no issues there. We also ended up moving our chickens out into the field. So if you don't know, we like to free range our chickens. That essentially lets them roam and eat whatever they can. The challenge is there are a lot of hawks and dogs and other predators around, so we can't just truly let them free range. Otherwise, there's a risk of them dying while we're in our house. So we do have a pretty huge area that we set up with an electric fence. It's each fence is about 100 feet long, and we have three of them, and so it's a pretty big area rectangled off. And it's an electric fence primarily to keep creatures out. I'm less concerned about the chickens escaping because they don't really want to go anywhere. They know where their food is. They're not going to go away, but we want to keep those dogs out and skunks and anything else. They have a secure movable house that we put in the plot, so we'll close it up at night. They have an automatic door actually, and we move it around so they have a fresh piece of ground to be on. Um, but yeah, that's what we ended up doing this last. We actually did it late last night. I got it all set up on Saturday, but then we ran out of time, slash, we're too tired to do it on Saturday because there was a lot of other things going on. And so we ended up doing it last night. So the thing about chickens is they are not fun to catch. Even if they're friendly, they don't really like to be caught. So you have to wait till it's night and it's almost dark, and that allows them to they go stand on their bars, they roost. They like to be up high when they sleep. And when they're sleeping or almost asleep and it's dark, they can't really get away from you. So we had to wait till then, put on some headlamps, and we had to move. We have 32 chickens. It was a good time to count exactly how many we had. So moved all 32 out there, split them among the houses. They're currently locked in the houses. You spend about one day, about a day and a half of them in the house. There's still plenty of space, and there's a lot of grass underneath. It has no floor, so they can eat and they've got plenty to do for a day. But you do that so they know where home is. Otherwise, they get a little confused when it starts getting dark the first night. And if they don't go in, then they're not as safe and warm and whatnot. So they're in their solitary confinement. I guess it's not solitary because they're with a bunch of their friends, but they're in the confinement phase until tomorrow, and then I'll let them all out. But they seem pretty happy. I mean, they're eating the greens. We've got a lot of tall weeds that they'll eat down and scratch the ground. It's a good way to clear it. Hopefully, they'll be zealous as they eat those things. But tell you what, moving them was fine, except for one of the roosters was a little bit of trouble. He was mad at me. He didn't peg me or anything, but he did not want me to move him. So he tried to get away. And we had a little bit of an incident where he didn't get hurt, as far as I know. I mean, he was acting normal this morning, but he fell and I had to catch him by his foot. And he was not thrilled about that. But he's all good. Everything's good. other than that one incident and the rest of the chickens panicking because they heard him squawking, everything went great. But as my wife and I were moving these chickens, we were just thinking, what are we doing? Like the things we're doing. I know that when we were first married over 11 years ago, we've been married for 11 years. Never did I see myself staying up late so that I could move chickens while they were sleeping into a structure out in the fields. Never saw myself doing that, but here we are. We love the eggs. We love the just having the animals. It's kind of a blast to be out and working. But yeah, I never saw myself doing that. So that was unexpected. I don't believe there's any other homestead updates other than yeah, the new babies and moving the chickens. So in terms of author updates, I am just over 55,000 words on Dwarf Blooded. So this is book three of the Hidden Heritage series. It will be a six-book series, and I'm moving through the writing phase a tad bit slower than I expected. Work has gone a little bit crazy recently, so I haven't had a lot of time to, mind space to think, and I'm not feeling my creative well as I should. So that slowed me up a tiny bit. I don't have writer's block or anything, but just the creative mentality is a tad bit slower today. But still making some progress. I want to finish the third book and then probably release the first three. Not all together, but maybe rapid succession or something along those lines. And then while I'm working on books four, five, and six, I think that's a good place to go. So we'll see how that all pans out. I did start dabbling in editing of the first one. I did have it line edited. I just have to go through the actual line edits, and I started that process. And it's not as painful as I expected it to be. So that's a positive sign. But the covers are coming along. I'm still noodling around with the text of it. The images themselves, I think I've generally settled on for the most part. That's been pulling stock images together to make it look good. It's not easy, that's for sure, particularly for someone who's colorblind. But I've been able to put together what I think is pretty decent renditions of the ebook cover. I do, of course, need to figure out the print book, but I won't know that until I have a better idea of page count. So that's still down the pike, but I'm pretty pleased with how the covers are turning out, considering I came into this with no experience whatsoever. Now, worst case, the covers don't perform well, then I can always modify and try something different. I do think they will, though. They do appeal to a YA audience. They are pretty punchy. The thumbnail version of them is not off-putting. I know that's a pretty tricky thing when your thumbnail is you can't really see it, can't read the text, or there's other considerations with that. I think the thumbnails look pretty good. So we'll keep noodling with that, and hopefully I'll be able to do a cover reveal here soon of at least the first one. And I think that'd be really fun. So looking forward to that. I did mention last week that I did release the next chapters of on my Ream. So if you'd like to join my Ream community, you can get early access to Dragon Blooded, which will be published later this year. And I'll be moving into Demon Blooded and all the other ones, as well as the epic fantasy side of things. I'm posting chapters to my epic fantasy stories, which I haven't talked a lot about recently, but Etcher's Plight. I did go through some editing of that and pretty pleased with it as well. Happy with where it is, which is a very good sign. But other than that, there aren't any updates for the authoring. So we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion with Will. Hey, Will, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Dan?
Doing very, very well. I'm excited to talk to you. You're actually the first author I've spoken to who writes tabletop gaming type books. So I'm really excited to dive into that and learn more about you and what you're doing every day. But before we do that, how long have you been writing and publishing?
Oh boy. Several years. I did a lot of freelance writing for tabletop role-playing games early on. But I guess the first book that I published came out in digital format in 2020 and then in print in 2021, followed quickly by another one in 2021 as well. So
That's
yeah.
awesome.
So I guess 3 or 4 years
And have you
published
always
anyway.
wanted to do that, or was this just kind of like a surprise to you, this publishing these
That's,
types of books?
yeah. No, that's really funny that, you know, I did. I was very interested. I loved things like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff when I was a kid. I thought it was fantastic. And I always thought, for a while there, I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could get, computers to do all this for you because it's really hard to get a group of people together to play sometimes or, things like that. And so we had these sort of dreams of making, online role-playing games and things. And, obviously history being what it is, EverQuest and a lot of other massive multiplayer role-playing games came out not too long after that, or probably in the next 5 to 10 years. Um, but yeah, I've always been really interested in it, but I didn't ever feel like it was something that was accessible to me, something that I could do, not until much later.
That's interesting. So is there a reason you didn't feel like it was accessible just because of the location of the people you wanted to play with? Maybe you couldn't get together in person, or were there other
I was
considerations?
able to play, but writing and publishing in tabletop role-playing games wasn't something that was really possible. Yeah,
That
it
makes
was
sense.
very difficult to get into that living, as I did at the time in either kind of backwater Eastern Oregon or Southern Utah. Just you had to be where the people were publishing role-playing games, which was like Minnesota and Seattle and places like that. So,
Yeah, that's right. Because it was definitely the publishing industry has shifted so much that has made a lot of accessible resources to anybody in terms of publishing. So
mhm.
just clarification for the books you have published, these are self-published books, is that correct?
They
Some of
are
them?
indie published by the company that I own, Adept Icarus.
Okay, yes. That's a perfect
Yep.
explanation. So that's right.
Yeah,
Adept Icarus is your publisher.
correct.
Um, do you have any intent to publish other tabletop gaming books from other people? I think actually you might have one now from someone else. Is that
Yeah,
right?
I actually
Remind,
do. Yeah, that's right.
remind me of the name of
Uh,
that. I saw it recently.
yeah, yeah, it's called Science Starlight.
That's right.
It is a solo, lonely science fiction role-playing game.
That's very, very cool. Have you ever done any of those yourself personally? Or
Solo
yeah.
RPGs. I have not yet finished one, but I have one that's very, very close. Whoop, the rules and the words are done,
Hmm.
and let's see if I can get myself back on the screen here. There we go. And we're just getting ready. We've actually sourced some of the art for it, but we're actually getting ready to go out to like a more open playtest type of thing right now.
So what does that look like? An open play test? Do you have like a straight, because in other publishing, I say other publishing like they're separated, but when you're publishing
Right.
novels, you have like a straight team that
We
does
should,
like arc reads or beta reads or whatever. Is it the same? Do
right.
you have a team that you have play through things?
Yeah, there are some folks like that for sure. So I've got, friends in the industry and things like that, but also we have a Discord server and there are people there who are interested in being early copies of things. And so we can show it to them. But I think an open playtest is a little different. That's usually meant to be, it's like it's out there, anybody can play it if they want to.
Hmm.
And that's something that we're thinking about experimenting with for this project. I just recently saw, I think it's called Daggerheart, which is a new TTRPG that they released an open beta version of their game on Drive-Thru RPG just a few weeks ago. And I was really fascinated by that idea. It's not pretty. It doesn't have all the art. It doesn't have, really nice layout or anything like that. It's not bad. And it probably doesn't have their complete rules either and text, but they released it and, are just promoting it and anybody can pick it up and give it a try and see what they think about it. So maybe considering doing something like that.
Very cool. I've never heard of something like that before. Is that
Yeah.
difficult to set up and manage, or is it pretty streamlined and configured in that specific site, so it's all easy for you?
I don't think it would be any different from publishing something else on Drive-Thru RPG.
Sure.
Basically, you have your files and you do your setup and everything, and you just give them to them. I don't think they're offering like a print version or anything. It's
I
just
see.
digital only. So
Digital. That
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense. Well, I mean, that's very cool. I didn't even realize that was a thing.
yeah,
So, it
yeah.
opens up your options to let people
It
give it a
does.
try before you. make it more formalized.
right?
So, so I'm curious to know because one thing that having very little experience with tabletop gaming, I have your books and I've read not all of them all the way through, but I have been reading them, just get an
Hmm.
idea of structure and kind of how do you go about world building, for the first book at least, your create book. How do you manage to gather the content for these books? Because you commission a lot of different artists for the
Hmm.
various art throughout the book. Are you the only one who wrote the text for at least these books, or did you have other authors collaborate with you on that?
There were other authors collaborating on both books, and of course, there's art direction, sourcing, that type of thing as involved as well. Um, it's games are interesting because you have rules, right, as
Mhm.
written, and then you also have other types of writing that can go into a game as well, including, actual fiction, like short fiction or even longer form fiction, but also you have sort of like world building Bible type stuff, right?
Hmm.
Like just very um what's the word I'm looking for? Just prose that isn't really telling a story. It's more describing. It's almost technical in nature in some ways, right?
Hmm.
You're saying, hey, here's how this works. Here's an actual example of it, right? Try that out. Or if you're doing something that's tightly tied to a theme in a world, you may actually describe that world in a lot of detail in a way that if you're writing, a novel and you did an info dump like that, no one would ever read your book, right?
Hmm.
But the beauty of TTRPGs, I guess, is that sometimes you can get away with some of that because it's actually what people expect. It's what they want, right? Something that they can take. Okay, here's your ideas. Now, how do I adapt my story in the world that you've created?
No, I mean that's a really interesting point. And I hadn't detected, even having read some of it, I didn't detect that there were different types of writing because, you know, uh, I write only novels, right? And so as I'm reading through this, I didn't even think about like kind of pre-set formats for the different types of reading, kind of what's expected from a TTRPG. Once again, because I haven't played a lot of D&D, but now that I think about it, of the various, as you read page by page, it obviously doesn't read like a novel. But to think, oh yeah,
Right.
the organization that must go into not only the writing of it, but the where you place things on the page to
Mhm.
make it feel dynamic and, kind of fit a TTRPG mold, which I know there's probably
Mhm.
some variations, but at the same
Oh,
time,
there's quite a few. Yeah.
there's probably a little bit of an expectation about what content should be part of that book, which is
Right.
fascinating. So
Yeah.
did you already have plans for how you wanted to format your book, or was it well, I think this is what elements I want part of my TTRPG, and we'll just figure it out as we go.
It's a good question. I think some of it is very intentional and
Hmm.
very, was kind of the plan from the beginning. If you look at, I think you have Arium Create
Hmm.
and Arium Discover. Arium Create was laid out in such a way that we said, okay, we know we want, to talk about how the game works a little bit, and then we want to do like a little bit of a deep dive into each of the different stages of the game. And then we want to have a written sort of narrative example of playing the game. Uh, and then we have a section in the back that has some optional rules and a few things like that. But that structure was planned, and it was
Hmm.
planned that way from the beginning, actually.
Got it.
Um, Not every tabletop role-playing game book is going to have narrative examples of play,
Okay, fair enough.
but it's not uncommon either, right? But for our particular game, we felt that it would be difficult to just pick it up and read the manual and then turn around and play without some sort of example to follow. So we took that approach, and we also, of course, created videos um, of
Hmm.
of people playing that you can go and watch and learn from that as well. So yeah,
Right, so like a YouTube channel.
Yep.
Very cool. I hadn't thought about making how-to videos. It's brilliant because YouTube is an excellent resource.
Right.
So yeah, just for context for the listeners, I met you at LTUE in Salt Lake, or I guess in Provo,
Hmm.
Utah is where it was. And at the time, we were talking about your specialty and interest in TTRPG writing. And, you were describing just the process of organizing everything and put together. And I said, I don't know how you do that. That is way overwhelming. I can hardly organize anything. And at the same time, you said, well, I don't know that I could write a novel. That's a lot of words. It's so,
Yeah.
it's just funny the different comparison of the writing. But I am curious to know if you ever think that maybe either as a result of Arium or other TTRPG books you write, do you anticipate that someday you might want to try to write novels?
Ooh, that is a great question. It's possible. And spoiler, I have tried to write novels. I've
Yeah,
tried
you
to write,
mentioned that. That's true.
yeah, I've tried to write two novels, and I couldn't, like, neither of them could break 30,000 words. It was somewhere in the 20s range when I ran out of steam on them for one reason or another, right? One, I mean, these are such common uh, things that you hear from struggling novelists, right? But I started rewriting it before I was done, and then
Mm,
then the other one, I got another project that came in, and I had a great head of steam and was really moving forward fast on that one, and then here comes this other project, and I just never came back to it because I had something else that I was working on. So yeah. So maybe someday, but it's not a, I want to get really good at making TTRPGs. I
hmm
think, we all learn as we go. There's no silver bullet to be great at something, right? You have to practice. You have to spend time at it. You have to hone it. You have to read other people's stuff. You've got to, work on your craft. And I think I can be a really great TTRPG writer, designer someday, right? I don't know if I'm there yet, but
Or
I think that possibility exists, and I'd like to see if it's possible, right?
yeah, I mean,
And then maybe I'll come back in because I love stories, right?
mhm.
Stories are what it's all about, right? Um, and so maybe I'll try and write a novel again someday, but I don't know. It's
Well, obviously no rush. I was just curious more than anything. But I mean,
yeah,
along
no, I
that
have a lot of
vein,
I have a lot of
with
respect for you and for the people who do and can, right? And I love to read, so I read novels all the time. Just
the writing is a different beast,
yeah,
definitely. And it's funny because looking from novelist to TTRPG writer, I think I'm impressed that you can write that, right? I'm notorious for overwriting. You know, I have a hard time keeping my manuscripts low. To
yeah,
write something 30,000 is almost impossible for me because I add too much complexity and
right.
detail, and I always want to make it this massive, unnecessary story. So to be able to write so concise, I think is a skill, right? For TTRPGs, you obviously don't
Mm,
like, I think what you said was you have the right amount of content and description, but it's minus the fluff, I would imagine, right? You're getting to the point about what this is the world, this is the way things work, this is, kind of not in the shortest terms possible, but
mm,
a lot of it is left up to their imagination, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of TTRPGs is you give them kind of a
yeah,
starting point and they have the ability to add their own to it. Is that
right.
correct?
Yeah, I think a lot of the most successful games are really good at leaving space for storytelling. I mean, even if you look at Dungeons and Dragons, who has, they've published hundreds and hundreds of books at this point, right?
Yeah.
A lot of adventures and things like that. But if you go back to the core books, right, they don't tell you what story to tell,
Mm-hmm.
right? They tell you, hey, here's the kind of characters we think will be in the story that you want to tell,
Sure.
right? So make some characters like this. Think about stories in a world that might involve those characters, right? And then go from there. So yeah.
No, and I see, I admittedly had only seen, actually, I don't really know when Dungeons and Dragons was released. Do you know how old is that game?
Oh, originally?
Yeah, the
It was
original
it was
books.
released in the 70s. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I remember when I was not born in the 70s, caveat. But the
Yeah.
earlier books that I saw, I don't remember there being that many in the 90s. I think probably a lot of them came later when it started to get a little bit more popular. Maybe I
Mm,
miss, but I think I remember seeing some of the early ones, and I don't remember them being very specific
mhm.
about the way. Once again, I never played, but I had some friends that were really interested and were getting into it.
Yeah.
But
They used to release campaign settings, is what they called them in the 90s. And so they would release these boxes that would
mm,
have like a lot of world building stuff in it.
yeah,
But it wasn't the story itself. There weren't a lot of plots, right? It's more
yeah,
like, hey, here's a city. In the city, here are five shops. Here are five, you know, different people who live here and things about them, right? And their stat block or whatever, if that's
hmm
something that you care about. So all of those things are in that type of book, but it didn't tell you what type of story to tell, right?
yeah. Oh,
Even
that
in
makes
those
sense.
campaign setting books.
Well, that's what Arium is as well, correct? It's well, at least create is primarily about world building, right? The
It
setting
is, yeah.
of the game itself. And then I lost the name of the second one. Just,
Discover.
what Discover,
Yeah.
thank you. So I guess
Mhm.
what's because I haven't had a chance to read too much of that one quite yet. I guess how are those books meant to work together to create a tabletop gaming experience?
Yeah. So Create is a game that lets you build a world together with your group around a table
Hmm.
or virtually. Easy to do either one. Discover is meant to be a set of rules that allow you to play characters in that world that you've created and tell a story together with that group, right? In some ways, it shares some commonalities with Dungeons and Dragons, but it's a little less tightly bound to the ideas of sort of sword and sorcery fantasy, epic fantasy, that type of thing, and a little more flexible, a little
Hmm.
more streamlined. Um, I'm not, you won't hear me say it's better or worse than any other game, right? I think depending on the type of game that you want to play and the stories you want to tell with your group, it might be better or worse for you, depending, right?
Hmm.
But I think it's meant to work with the worlds that you can create with Arium Create,
Hmm.
which is really pretty much any kind of world. And so it's very flexible in that way. Yeah.
I mean, that's
But
very
also not
cool.
meant to be overbearing in terms of rules. It's only like 60 some pages, or I think it's 70, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was as bad as we could make it and still have it be a sort of a zine format. So yeah,
Uh-huh. Pushing the limits over there. You thought you could only write
yeah.
short books, and here you are pushing the limits on your how did you say the classification for the book? Like
Uh, it's role playing. Yeah, that's
okay,
the role playing rules. Mhm.
interesting. Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of this within the world that I'm not super familiar with. But
Hmm.
so in putting a book together like this and collaborating with other authors and artists, how did you
Hmm.
source the people that you wanted to work with? Both the artists and the authors. Are these people that you've known for some time, or did you find them through other means?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the authors for Arium Create and Arium Discover was a friend of mine who helped uh, sort of come up with the idea for Arium Create initially, right? Um, we were in a writing group together in a fiction writing group, right?
Sure.
Um, and we, sort of discovered the core engine of Create. I wouldn't say that we, built it from scratch necessarily, but we uncovered it in a way,
Hmm.
right? It's like, hey, here's a really cool way that we could do this. And we took it actually out to a couple of conventions, and we took it to our writer group, and we played it with people, right? And people really loved it. And so I just got this wild idea. I'm like, I feel like this is like a game because I was already working in games freelance at that point. I was like, I feel like this is like a game all by itself. But if we put role-playing rules with it, then it could be like so much more than just, hey, I'm going to get together with my friends and build a world, right? And so one of the people that we met at one of those conventions was Asha Entz,
Mm,
who was really keen on the idea. We had met actually a couple of times, but she was very she really liked the world building, and she had an idea for um, kind of the role playing rules. She had something that she'd been working on for a little while. I think her original idea was to use it in sort of a dream um, world sort of scenario where anything is possible because you're in a dream and you can make it happen if you do whatever. And so it
sure.
was already sort of flexible, and then we tweaked that and tuned it and made it into what it is in Arium Discover eventually. So it was just happenstance really that we met and got talking about things, and it turned out to be a great partnership. There's one other author who contributed to Arium Discover. That's Diogo Nogueira from the Rio de Janeiro area of Brazil. He's someone who I met sort of through reputation at first, and then I also met him at a convention, and he knew some people that I knew in the TTRPG industry. And as I was looking at potential stretch goals that we could do when we were building out the Kickstarter, because we did a Kickstarter for Arium, I reached out to him to see if he would be interested in creating some tables for us in the back of the book, because I thought it would be nice to have those, to have some ideas that would be easy for people to get inspiration from when they're creating their characters, like descriptors for characters and things like that, descriptors for their powers, things that they can do, right? And he did an awesome job creating all of those. He's a brilliant mind for that sort of thing. So it was really cool.
It was very cool. So like
Yeah.
leveraging existing connections and relationships. But how about for the art? Did you have a lot of artistic friends, or did you have to leverage like online resources,
I did
Instagram,
not have a
social
lot of
media?
artistic friends. Yeah, art was harder, and learning to be an art director was very rocky at first.
Okay.
There was a lot of time I spent trying to figure out, first off, well, how do we put a cover on this book that will evoke possibility or like whatever you want, right? And we went the rounds multiple times trying to find different ways and to represent that, but ultimately ended up with the covers that we did, which I'm very proud of. I really like them a lot. But those are produced by a Portuguese artist named Andreas Rocha, who is uh, brilliant, who I found on ArtStation just randomly. I was frustrated, I'll tell you, because I had been going through so many artists on ArtStation, on Instagram, on wherever I could find them, right? Looking for something that I thought would work. And I reached out to Andreas, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I can do your covers." And I said, "Well, we need three of them because we're going to have three zines, right? So would it be could you make them so that they sort of flow into one another and you could have like a triptych sort of effect?" He's like, "Oh yeah, we can do that."
I hadn't even
And
noticed that, but looking at them now, I see that.
yeah,
Probably because I'm colorblind. So,
oh yeah,
the color shifts at the edge of each cover, kind of subtly transitioning from one to the other, but seeing them all
right,
three next to each other. Oh yeah, they do.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
cool.
they do.
Very cool.
Yeah, so we reached out to him, and then I was struggling with what to do with the interior art because we knew, we wanted to have good interior art, and we knew we were operating on a budget, right? a fairly limited budget. And so some of the interior art, like all the full color art on the interior, the stuff that's, very evocative, and it's not like the graphic designed art stuff, right?
Hmm.
But all of that art is it is by an individual named Tithi Luadfong, who a friend of mine in the industry pointed me to. And that person is, I've never met them, I've never talked to them. Their art it's available on Shutterstock, so you can go and license it for use, as long as you're not making something, that's going to be published in the, hundreds of thousands of copies or anything like that, right? You can use it, and we did. So yeah, I bought it. It's stock art. Yeah, all of it
Very
by the
cool.
same artist. And yeah, and it feels cohesive, and it also fit kind of what we're going for our game.
That's very
Yeah.
cool. I want to kind of drill into, you mentioned that being the art director was challenging. And so I'm curious to know what were some of the biggest learnings from that, because, someone else who writes novels like myself, or maybe they want to
Hmm.
do a Kickstarter and they're looking for stretch goals, or I know there are people
Hmm.
that are doing special edition versions like the Brandon Sanderson campaigns, leather bound with
Hmm.
art pages kind of scattered
Yeah.
in between maybe chapter headings or something. What advice do you have for them? People who are looking for art, maybe they have no idea where to start, and what were some of their biggest learnings that you
Yeah.
can share?
Well, making friends with artists doesn't hurt, that's for sure.
Okay.
Um, that definitely will help. Also, just always be looking, right?
Mm,
Always have your I want to make a note when I see art that I like. Is this an artist that will accept commissions? Do they have published posted rates anywhere that I can look at, right? And just keep, I mean, this isn't the 80s, so I don't have a Rolodex, but I've got a wiki page full of artists that I'm interested in potentially working with that just grows all the time now. So that's one way to go about it. Um, I do have I do know some artists now. And I actually have some artists in my family now.
oh,
A couple
cool.
of my kids have become actually really, really good artists. I'm using some of their art in some of the upcoming games,
Nice.
uh, and also other artists as well. Um, I've been working on a game, and this is kind of how I work, right? I take something that seems like it's much harder than what I did last time, and then I figure out how to do it.
Hmm.
We're working on a new game called Vi. Well, the name may change, but anyway, we're working on a new game, and it will have art by 22 different artists in
Wow.
it. Yeah. So learning to get good at working with artists, well, work with 22 artists. You'll start to learn to get better at working with artists. I would say working with more is a good way to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really good point. The whole compilation or compiling the authors that, or excuse me, the artists that you might want to work with. That's a really good
Yeah.
idea, and it's not something that I'm doing today. I do need to do that because,
Yeah.
if I were to say, hey, I want to do a Kickstarter next week, I would be starting with completely, I mean, you wouldn't do that. First, anybody listening, don't do
Mm-mm.
that. If you're going to do a Kickstarter, take time. But, I would be starting from ground zero with artists because I
Yeah.
don't have connections. I don't even know like what style I like. I haven't done a lot of that research
Hmm.
or thought process beforehand. So I can imagine it was so much easier or would be so much easier to have those things documented and understand rates and before you get into it. Yeah, I have so many questions about that, but I do want to talk a little bit about kind of the future of your writing. Do you have a lot of new games in mind, or because you mentioned a new one that you're kind of writing, do you have
Hmm.
authors? You use this as an example. We have so many ideas. There's always way too many ideas than we have time to write for.
Yep.
Is that the same for tabletop gaming? Do you have just so many ideas you can't write them all?
That's certainly the case for me.
Okay. Awesome.
I have, I have a huge backlog of ideas. Some of them are a sentence long idea. Some
Sure.
of them are a few paragraphs, right? Some of them are more than that, right? Like maybe there's a started project somewhere or something. But the, essentially you have to figure out which things you're most interested in, right? What
Hmm.
speaks to you? What do you want? Because when you write, you have to write for you, just like with fiction. If it's not something that you're interested in that you would like, then you're never going to finish it, right? So
Hmm.
that's really important. And then once you get it done for you, then you can figure out how to make it for other people as well, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I've got a couple of projects in the works right now. Actually, three projects in the works that are unpublished, unfunded, right? Or they're being funded by the profits of other
Yeah.
projects by Adepticus, right? But no crowdfunding or anything like that. And then I have the two projects that are funded. There's still one book to release for one of them, and then the other one has, uh, let's see, a book, a cassette, and a journal to produce that I need to produce print stuff for still. Yeah.
Clarification. So like an audiobook version, correct?
It's not an audiobook version, it's actually music
Music.
to
Oh,
listen
interesting.
to while you play.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned cassette, which I know what that means because I'm very familiar with cassettes. I'm old enough to know that, but I was just
Yeah.
clarifying what that. So kind of like a
And
music,
yeah, an audio
a
audio
collection of
cassette.
music.
Yeah.
Are those
Mhm.
existing compilations, or did you work with composers as well, or like
I
music
did
writers?
work with a composer.
Wow,
Yeah.
very cool.
That was a new and exciting thing to do as well. Something I'd been thinking about for a long time, and I have another project. So I've alluded to some projects, right? So Science Starlight, which we mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
has the audio cassette. I worked with a composer to compose the songs that go with the audio cassette. It's also available online, right? It's like you can listen to the whole thing for free on SoundCloud. You don't, like anybody can have the music. It's available now, right? Um, but it is, um, it was fun to make a cassette for part of the physical rewards for the Kickstarter, and a lot of people were really excited about it, and and some people are like, "Why?" Which is in some ways a little bit how I feel because I lived through the pain of having only cassettes and
Hmm.
wanting something better. But um, so yeah, it was a lot of fun to do that. But I really had originally reached out to this composer and talked to them and was planning to have them do a soundtrack for a future game that's not released, that's not been crowdfunded yet, called Rue from Ruin, which is the other solo game that I mentioned. And it's about being a this is the theme, I guess, of my solo games, but it's about being a sad werewolf who's alone. So yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah,
Okay, but how cool
yeah.
though. The last time I talked to you, you had not mentioned working with composers. You mentioned the artist, but
Mm,
I think my guess is you had to learn a lot of this as you went because you probably didn't
mhm.
have a lot of experience, but now you do. And so hopefully the
Right.
next projects feel a little bit more, not easy, but manageable because
Sure. Yeah.
you've worked in this way before. So, I mean, I think that's so cool. I would love to learn more about tabletop gaming. I think just the way you described working with very artists and being organized, it just probably polishes it to a point where it feels like a really impactful game, right? Anybody could probably use white and black page and write anything and throw it up online and say, hey, here's a tabletop gaming. But all of those little elements, the beautiful art that you're working with and the music, I think it's just so cool to create a great experience,
Mhm.
a unique
Yeah.
experience. but I'm gonna take a look at the music only because I love music and I'm genuinely curious
Mm,
to know if it may become my focus music while I'm working or something. Uh,
yeah. Oh, it might be really good for that. You can find it. The album name is Cyan Sounds. And it is, you can find it on SoundCloud by Lance Clark is the composer. So yeah, it's definitely sort of a 80s retro synth sort of, you know, stuff. It's definitely good for focus. Yeah.
Very cool. I'm always in need of focus. My brain doesn't ever stop
Yeah.
working unless I have it constant
Yeah.
inputs of music. So, but this has been an excellent conversation. I would love to, before we end here, where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to check it out?
Yeah. Uh, Generally speaking, adepticarus.com is a great place to go looking, right? You can find links to our Discord server there. You can find links to all of our social media. Uh, there, you can pre-order the physical copy of Cyan Starlight there, or you can go to the cyanstarlight.space website and you can see the online tools that we created for Cyan Starlight. You can see the music, right? That's there on the tools page. And also, pre-order the game there as well. So or you can go look on Kickstarter for just look up Adept Icarus on Kickstarter and you can see our previous things that we've crowdfunded there. But we
That's
have a
awesome.
mailing list you can join as well through the website, and there we keep people up to date when something new and interesting happens, which is never more than once a quarter. So
I see nothing wrong with that. You've got a lot going on,
yeah,
but it's awesome to know, and I'll make sure to put those all in the show notes for people to find them easily. So,
awesome.
but yeah, thanks for joining me today. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Will and I actually met at goodness gracious, why can't I remember the name? Is the Writers Conference down in Provo, Utah. LTUE, that's what it's called. We met at LTUE. He had the booth next to me, which was really fun. We just chatted and I got to know him and his tabletop gaming. I ended up buying some of his books and yeah, it was really a lot of fun. So another good reason to go to a writers conference is to connect with other authors, other types of authors all over the place and artists. It was a lot of fun. So I recommend going to a writers conference if you can make it happen. So next week, we'll be talking to Joe Field about living your best creative life. We dive into his experience getting into writing, why he did it, how it lends to his life, his quality of life, and how he can live his best creative life around feeling that creative well, and things that he implements in his life to make sure that he is as creative as he can be to, bolster his authoring and writing. So I think you want to stick around for that conversation next week. You'll very much enjoy it. As usual, if you'd like to join me on the podcast, just head to thecasualauthor.com, fill out the pitch form. Love to learn about you, hear about your authoring, writing, AI generation, whatever it is that's connected to authoring, publishing, of course, artists. We'd love to have you and learn more about you. So just go there, or you can email me at dan@thecasualauthor.com. I'd love to hear comments from you if you have thoughts on the podcast, if you want to hear more of certain things, if you had feedback for me. Don't be afraid to send that in. I'd love to learn from you. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to talking to you next week.